This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 215 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with garden consultant Andrea Whiteley with an Australian gardener's view of American gardens. The plant profile is on Jewels of Opar, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events and this week's garden tasks in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on a perfect fall day from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Andrea Whiteley. She is a garden consultant based in Perth, Western Australia. Welcome, Andrea.
Good morning, Kathy.
Well, I was going to say good evening to you. So we are talking on opposite sides of the globe. We are in opposite seasons, opposite times of day, and we'll get into all of that over this episode and comparing and contrasting our different gardening styles on each continent. But first, we like to ask our guests here at the GardenDC podcast, were they born with a green thumb and chlorophyll in their veins?
Well, I think I probably was. My great-grandmother was, she was a very keen gardener. And I remember going on walks around the neighbourhood with her where I grew up in Melbourne, on the other side of the continent. And she would avail herself of what she called slip cuttings. And they were little thefts from other people's gardens, really. Anything that was hanging through the fence, she would snip off a little bit with her fingernail and take it home and pop it into a pot and or a container and bring it on and then enjoy it in her own garden. So, she called them slip cuttings. And, that was good fun. But also I had the benefit of growing up across the road. I went to school in Melbourne, in Victoria, and in South Jarrah, and many people would be familiar with the very famous Victorian or Melbourne Botanical Gardens. And I went to school across the road from the Botanical Gardens. And so that was our playground for the 12 years that I was at school. And we used to visit the gardens all the time. It was our outdoor classroom. And in year 10, horticulture was a compulsory subject. And so we learned to propagate. We learned how to draw plans for garden design. We learned all botanical names of plants, all things that are quite unusual, really, for children in school in Australia. But we had the benefit of that, so we were very, very lucky to grow up there.
Yeah, I'm envious. That sounds like wonderful courses, and almost like every school should offer those.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? I think more schools now are having, vegetable gardens and things like that. But that is quite different from what I experienced, because we actually, at that young age, so age 14, I guess, we were taught how to do a proper garden plan, how to draw it from scratch, how to make a design, how to incorporate different plant species into gardens suitable for Melbourne, but not obviously suitable for Western Australia where I live now. But very, very helpful education.
And did you think during those classes and experiences that you might have a profession in horticulture?
Never in a million years. Never in a million years did I think that. I used to love the classes, but and certainly appreciated the surroundings in which we lived. We used to go to every Sunday. My dad came to Australia from Germany, and when he arrived by boat, he came with basically a bicycle and a small backpack. and arrived in the country. And the first stop was Fremantle in Western Australia, and then over to Victoria on the next stage of the boat journey and ship journey, I should say. And he very quickly fell in love with the Australian bush. And so every Sunday, as we were growing up, we would go and have a picnic in the bush, and he would take along his little homemade barbecue. He's very inventive, my dad, and take along a little barbecue if there wasn't one available. And we would fry off some sausages or something like that, some meat, and have a salad and have a little picnic in the bush, and then go for a walk through the bushland, which really gave me a wonderful insight into what nature was all about. And breathing fresh air is very important to the Germans. And so that's what we did every single Sunday. And we also had a holiday house in the mountains on the Victorian high plains, where we would ski in the winter and then holiday in the summer and go on bushwalks. So from a very early age, I was introduced to nature and spent a lot of time in nature. And I think that's really influenced where my career has headed now at my tender age.
I think I was going to say your bushwalks sound a lot like what some people call as botanizing. So
I guess so.
yeah.
I guess so, but we never really called it that. We just went for a walk and, noticed we were never allowed to. Definitely, well, there was no devices. So when we went for a drive anywhere, we were always looking out the window. We were never allowed to have a sleep in the back seat. We always had to look out the window to see what was about and what was around us. And it actually has taught me to be a very observant adult. So I think that's why I enjoy traveling and seeing things all over the world and seeing different plant species and things like that, because I notice those things that other people might not, because I was taught from a very young age to see what's around us and enjoy and embrace nature, really.
That probably is what makes you an excellent garden consultant. So let's bring that up to today and share with our listeners where you are gardening and what those conditions are like, and maybe some of your favorite things that you are growing.
So I live in Perth in Western Australia, which is in the southwest of Australia, and we live in a biodiversity hotspot. So it is really nature's wonderland down here, and we have it's USDA Zone 11A for people that understand the zones. So we have a hot, dry summer, and it should be a cool, wet winter. However, our rainfall has definitely deteriorated in the last few years. So it's getting drier and drier. Our city now operates from 2 desalination plants. We're about to bring on a third, very much needed. So we used to have dams which were filled up every winter with water that serviced the city, but as the city's grown and the water use has increased and every second person has a swimming pool, we draw upon that water very quickly. We also have groundwater, which is accessible. Some people have a bore in their backyard where they draw upon the groundwater. And we're allowed to water from October through to March, twice a week using a watering system. And then we have to switch off our watering systems and we're allowed to water by hand through the winter months. So from March, which is sort of autumn really, or fall, right through until we're allowed to turn it back on in October. We're allowed to water twice a week only, and for 20 minutes per station. A lot of people have subsurface irrigation systems, which then allow them to put the water on a little longer, and it works because it waters the plants at the drip zone. which is much more effective, and then it's just covered over with mulch so you don't see it. So we're very much very conscious of the water that we use in our gardens and saving every drop and making every drop count. So we all mulch our gardens very heavily with either straw mulch from lupins or wood chips from either our native species where the trees have had to be taken down for development, or we don't use the bush. We try not to use the bush. We're not allowed to use that sort of virgin bush land for wood chipping. Very conscious about that. Or we use pine forest plantations, and they take that down and use the wood chips from that. So everybody enhances their soil if they want to have a good garden, enhances their soil with a lot of organic matter, and then they have drip irrigation, not sort of little sprayers anymore. Everybody's moved on from that. Drip irrigation and then mulch on top. That's how our plants survive the summer. We can grow most things that you guys can grow. We can even up in the hills. We can even grow bulbs and tulips and things like that. But if we want to grow tulips down here on the coastal plain where I live, we have to put our bulbs into the crisper container of the refrigerator and then bring them out at the right time and pot them up, usually into containers, if we want to have tulips. So little things like that we need to do to adapt, but most people can garden all through the year here in Western Australia. We don't garden seasonally like you do, so we don't have that big winter break where you don't really garden or don't have the opportunity to garden other than enjoy seed catalogues. So we tend to garden and spend time in our gardens for most of the year. There might be a short break in the winter time where people don't really want to get out because it's raining, but most of the time people garden all through the year here.
And so you're having a vegetable garden year round?
Yes, absolutely. We have very naturally sandy, gutless soil. So our soil is very, very ancient, and it has very, very fine particles. So the water just goes straight through. So we have to, regardless of whether we're growing vegetables or we're growing exotic species or native plants, to have a really good garden, you do need to improve the soil using organic matter to try and change those tiny little shiny particles of soil that just allow the water to run through, and to interrupt the shininess of those particles. They're microscopic soil particles. We add things to our soil to make those particles jagged on the edges, if you like, so that the water then stays at the root zone of the plants. And so everybody's encouraged to improve their soil. You can't really grow a vegetable garden straight into our native soil. You do need to improve it a lot before you'll have a good crop of. We can't just stick things into the ground like you guys can and expect a vegetable garden to suddenly pop out. It won't work, or the vegetables themselves will be of very poor quality. So most people tend to these days have raised growing beds in their garden, or wicking beds work very well, where you can introduce very high quality soil, and you might have a series of 3 raised garden beds, or that you bring in beautiful quality soil with lots of nutrients in it, and then you will plant your crops according to that. So, or in containers, a lot of people grow vegetables and herbs in containers. I grow my herbs in a raised garden bed that sort of stands at hip height, which is very good for people with a sore back. And very effective because you can control the soil, you can control the water, and also for pest and disease control, it makes sense as well.
And yeah, it does sound very similar to desert Southwest
It is
conditions
a bit like that.
in
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
United States. And I
Yeah.
remember on a previous GardenComm conference going to Arizona, and instead of raised beds, they had sunken beds in the desert. And I'd never heard of actually sitting in wet and trying to collect water like that. So that was definitely a shock there. So we should transition and talk a little bit about GardenComm. So GardenComm is formerly Garden Writers Association, and both Andrea and I are members, and that's how we have met in the past, especially at recent conferences that we've both attended. And she has made the trip all the way over to America. I think, have you been 5 times? How many times have you come to our conferences?
Oh, well, this was just I think it was about my 7th
Oh,
conference.
wow.
So
Yay.
yeah, I've been attending GardenComm conferences since 2015. So yeah.
Excellent. And there was a
Um,
little break in there where we had virtual um, and weren't able to meet in person. But let's talk a little bit about some of those GardenComm conferences, and maybe even starting with your first one, your first impression of American gardens.
so my first conference was in Pasadena in California,
Mm-hmm.
just outside of LA. Everybody knows where Pasadena is, I'm sure. And it was so hot
Hmm.
the week that we were there in Pasadena. Everybody was complaining about the heat, and I was thinking, this is great. It's just like summer back home. So, the plant material that I saw there in Pasadena at places like the Huntington and even in the LA County Arboretum, and many of the places that we went to were plants that I could recognize from home. So it was interesting that they were using those plants because obviously they were hardy for Pasadena and that area. So that was very interesting to me, and I was able to take back many of the things that we saw and learnt and applied them into our own garden here, our own gardens here in Perth. So that was really an eye opener for me, and to see some of the garden plants that were actually bred by our beautiful Kings Park here in Perth, and were being used at the Huntington. So things like the kangaroo paws were being used in containers, Anaxanthus,
Mm.
and also the scaevola, which is used in many container plantings all through the US now. I've seen it. It's a very popular plant. So
Mm-hmm.
it comes in white or purple. And it's a lovely, lovely plant. It's a great spiller plant for containers. And so I saw that for the first time being used, which was very exciting, knowing the history of those plants, that they had been bred for commercial use and for home gardens by our people here in Kings Park in Perth. So that was a great eye opener for me, the first trip that I made, and that was my first time that I'd been to the US for Garden Writers of Garden Writers Association, which was a really great experience.
Hmm. Yeah, I hadn't realized that Scaviola is from Australia. I just figured, I don't know where it was native to.
Not
Um,
just Australia, not
yeah.
just Australia, right here where I'm from.
And from your region as well. So a great drought tolerant plant, great for containers and as you said for spilling, and it usually comes in those blue almost white tones. I'm trialing a few new introductions of those as well in some clay pots in full sun. And we should talk about the seasonality right now that we're experiencing. So we're in mid uh autumn here on the east coast of America, and you are just starting off spring there.
I am indeed. Well, this is actually what we call our second spring, and it starts on the 1st of October and goes right through until the end of November. And this is the time of the year when, if you were wandering around the bushland and even through Kings Park, you'll see wildflowers in bloom that have changed from the the plants that were in the first spring that were flowering were in shades of pink. Now they have faded out and the new plants are coming through, and they're in shades of yellow. So all through, if you were to do a wildflower tour out into the country, or if you were to visit Kings Park, you'll notice that the plants have now changed from being shades of pink to shades of yellow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we notice the subtle difference in the seasons. So this season I've adopted my gardening method to garden by the indigenous seasons, and the indigenous people from this area are called the Noongar people, and they have a 6-season calendar, and the current season is called Barang, and that signifies a warmer period. The earth starts to warm, the soil temperatures increase, and the plant material, as I said, the flowers in the bushland tend to be yellow, shades of yellow, and then rising up to the end of November, early December, when our naturally occurring West Australian Christmas tree, you'll see that around the outskirts of Perth. It's where land has been cleared, it doesn't exist anymore. It's a beautiful tree called Nuytsia, and I'll just spell that for you, the Nuytsia, Nuytsia, floribunda, and that's what we call the West Australian Christmas tree. And it has bright yellow flowers, and we see it at Christmas time, and it's absolutely stunning. It's like a shot of gold emerging from a grey-green landscape. Absolutely stunning plant that you can't grow in your garden. It only grows in the natural bushland because it requires certain mycorrhiza around it in order to survive. So very interesting tree, and it will grow up to about 10 metres high. So you'll start to see that towards the end of November blooming, signalling the change of seasons and the end of the season, which we call Camberang.
And so some of those plants obviously are native to just your region, not to all of Australia. Is there a big native plant movement amongst gardeners there?
Very much so, because people are learning more and more that our native species are the ones that survive the best. And now that they've been grown by our local growers here, and we've got some really fantastic local growers. There's one called Banara. There's another one called Domus, Domus. Very good growers of all plants, Indigenous and non-Indigenous species. But also people are now planting out their nature strips or verges, I think you guys call them hell strips, in
Mm-hmm.
front of their homes with native species rather than lawn, allowing nature to pass through. So virtually a nature corridor on the side of the road. So even right in the middle of the city, we're providing for nature by offering native plants where pollinators can stop and, do what they need to do before they move on to perhaps a manicured lawn area. They can stop and rest in a nature strip that has been planted out by somebody who's using our Indigenous plants, or plants that are mostly native to Western Australia, but people also combine it obviously with non-Indigenous species.
Mm-hmm.
And the local councils are very generous in that they offer. There's a small nursery where people can go and buy native species plants, particularly for Perth coastal plain, that will grow very successfully on their verges with verges or hill strips or nature strips is what we call them, where they will be very successful with very little water. So we tend to use plants for that will need water through the first summer just to get established, and then after that they should be able to survive on their own through our hot summer, and not just survive but thrive, rather
Mm-hmm.
than a lawn which would be very thirsty and need watering 2 or 3 times a week. to survive and look good. So more and more people are appreciating using our native species in their gardens.
It's good to hear, and I do love the term nature strip. I think that should
Yeah.
catch on worldwide. And so now that you've mentioned lawns, we will talk about those and the differences between American and Australian. And obviously, we've both taken those from the British culture. And so the lawn, a big green, you know, swath of turf grass is seen as something as a status symbol here, and conforming with your neighbors and having something beautiful out front, although the beauty is in the eye of the beholder there. Is there a big lawn culture where you are?
There is. I in all of my designs, I always incorporate an area of lawn, and I use palmetto buffalo turf because it's very, or it's called Sir Walter or palmetto. A lot of people would know it by that name. It is a species of turf that grows very well here in either the sun or the shade, and it really does better if people leave the length of the each blade a little bit longer through the summer months. If you cut it too short, it tends to burn the roots because the roots are obviously just sitting on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to use that as my preferred lawn type. And I always recommend that people have a small area of good quality, a soft green lawn to look out at because it just is cool on the eye. Otherwise, if you have only mulch and native plants, the reflective heat and the glare back into your eyes makes you feel hot in the summer months. So you do need a small area, I think, of soft green, really good quality lawn, and people can look after that if it's a small space. And they're the gardens that I mostly design. But for bigger gardens that I've put in, yes, I have incorporated areas of lawn and nice undulating lawns because of the fact that you do need that lovely green to look out on. But you also do need lots of trees. And so Perth has one of these lowest tree canopies on the planet because developers, now I'm going to get on my hobby horse, developers come in and they completely denude the land, and then there's nothing left to be grown, and then the new people have to come in and plant trees all over again. So it is a bit of a bugbear of mine. So we have this very low tree canopy. So whenever I'm a bit like the story of Johnny Appleseed, wherever I put in a new garden, I put in all these trees and put in advanced trees, and my clients are very understanding of the need for that. So luckily they go along with me on that idea of putting in more trees than we perhaps have even taken out in some instances if it's a big block. So very much incorporating some lawn, but also having big garden beds with lots of plants in them as well, but lots of trees too.
Mm-hmm. And so for the gardens you visited in the United States and looking at some of the tree uses there, how would you compare those?
Well, very different. So we don't have we don't have a lot of naturally occurring deciduous trees. So most of our trees have leaves on them all through the year. And so they're regenerating all through the year. So they drop leaves all year. So there's a lot of leaf litter, particularly from our eucalyptus species, a lot of leaf litter because they're constantly regenerating. So in Western Australia, we have some beautiful, beautiful native eucalyptus. The Marri, which is a beautiful, the colour of the wood is sort of a deep pink, very gorgeous. And I'm looking out on two in my backyard. So I've got a beautiful Marri, and I've also got a Jarrah tree. And the Jarrah is spelled Jarrah. And the Jarrah tree was used and continues to be used for floorboards for people's homes, and we have beautiful Jarrah floorboards in our home, and we absolutely love them because they have a deep, almost red, very, very rich, beautiful coloured wood. And so they're both eucalyptus species, and they're constantly regenerating, and they're wonderful big trees in the landscape. And so where people have been able to preserve them on their suburban blocks, the big native birds love coming in there and sitting and roosting and feeding off them when they have their nuts, because they all have great big nuts, and that's why our big parrots love to come in and cause havoc at a certain time of the year when the nuts are just ripe enough for them to eat.
Sounds similar to a large red oak or walnut here on the east coast
It
of.
is very
Yeah.
much like a
Mhm.
big walnut,
Mm.
exactly. And so the birds just love to crack them, but different shape to a walnut because it's a big, tall, tall tree with a wide canopy at the top. But unfortunately, we've lost a lot of trees in the natural landscape, and also on suburban blocks for a couple of reasons. We've had a very dry period these last couple of years, but also we've got a problem with a creature called the shothole borer, and it's causing all sorts of problems with our trees all over Perth. So our Department of Agriculture, which is known as DPIRD, are very vigilantly going around and checking people's trees when there's a sign of borer to try and mitigate the problem, because we're just losing too many trees as a
Hmm.
result.
And that's an imported insect?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah.
So our biosecurity sort of, unfortunately, let us down in some ways. Yes. So
Mm-hmm.
the same too with another awful creature that is the scourge of rose growers, and myself included, because I love my roses. It's a problem called chili thrip. It's a
Mm.
type of thrip that only really came to light during COVID, strangely, when we were the most isolated city. We were an island within an island, so we were the most isolated city in the world. We are anyway, but during COVID even more so, because our borders were completely closed. People couldn't travel into Western Australia at all from anywhere for nearly 2 years, which kept COVID completely out of Western Australia. And then we discovered this awful thing on our roses called chili thrip that occurs in the summertime. So we're just understanding that more and working out best ways to deal with that in the summertime. So yeah, all these pests and diseases are coming for us, Kathy.
I know. So that's the problem with travel and open borders. But yes, there's always great things too. But I was going to say about the chili thrips that I am hearing rumors about them through our rose societies and things, and everybody's keeping a vigilant eye out for those type of problems.
Oh, it's horrible. Absolutely horrible. And is the most talked about thing when I'm on radio in the summer. It
Mm.
is the most talked about thing. It's just awful.
For us, it was a generation or so ago with the Japanese beetles being
Right.
introduced to the east coast of America and just devastating people's roses. Now, of course, there's been waves of other things, but emerald ash borer and the spotted lanternfly are the two top of the list right now.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
Let's talk about something a little more pleasant.
Cheerful.
A little more cheerful, which is maybe some of the public gardens that you've been able to access with GardenComm and some of your visits outside of GardenComm. Do you have some favorite public gardens, and what made those your favorites?
So I have been so blessed that I have had access to the most incredible public and private gardens through GardenComm. I'm so lucky, and to have made such beautiful friends who, after the conferences, take me on these wonderful trips all over the country. I am very, very lucky and super grateful. A friend of mine her name is AZ Plant Lady, or AZ Plant Lady, you guys would call her. So she's from Phoenix, Arizona. Her name's Noelle Johnson. And she has been a very generous host. And I was lucky enough to go to the Desert Botanical Gardens just outside of Phoenix. So that was an absolute highlight for me. So stunning. With GardenComm, I think one of my most favourite gardens that we went to was also, I think Atlanta was a real highlight for me. And a big surprise. The gardens around Atlanta, Georgia, are so beautiful, and through Athens, that was a fantastic conference. I really enjoyed those gardens. Chicago, the Lurie Gardens were fabulous. I just thought that was wonderful. The rooftop gardens that we saw in Chicago, where they had incarcerated women working on the rooftop and providing fruit and vegetables in the rooftop in the middle of the CBD there in Chicago, providing fruits and vegetables to hospitals. I thought that was an incredible program, and that really was a highlight for me. The High Line in New York, I mean, I've been there 3 times now and watched it grow over the last nearly 10 years, which is, I've just come back and had a visit to New York, and that was wonderful. Watching those trees grow along the High Line has been incredible, and just seeing how people are embracing that is fantastic. I guess one of my favourite public gardens is Chanticleer. I love it so much there. Sort of, I come back. I've been there now twice, but for a very long time each time, which has been lovely. I think they do a fabulous job there at Chanticleer. And Longwood is spectacular, of course. Gosh, I could go on and on. The Phipps Garden in Pittsburgh is fabulous. As I say, Kathy, I've been so lucky. I get to see things that other people just would never dream of if they love gardens.
Yeah, we're so fortunate in the Mid-Atlantic to have Chanticleer and Longwood and the Phipps just up the road. But
Yeah.
I agree with you. The Atlanta Botanic Garden and the gardens around Atlanta are stunning, and there's so much plant breeding and work being done in the University of Georgia area around in Athens. It's just inspiring.
It really is, and all led by Michael Durr, I suppose. Yeah.
He's had a big hand in that.
Yeah.
And so I was going to ask, what plant do you see, and this maybe you can say it could be more than one, that you've seen in American gardens or in public gardens or private, that you're like, I wish I could stick this in my suitcase and take it home?
Muley grass.
Yeah.
Now, I took a long time to say that, didn't I? I love that plant so much, and every year I go and see it and I think, oh my God, I wish I could have that. I just love the colour of the movement of it. It's so stunning. I love it, love, love it. Rudbeckia, I can't really grow very well here, so that's always beautiful. Even What else? It's not even some of your annuals I get quite jealous of because I just can't grow them here. Our soil is, as I said, so depleted of any nutrients that if I was to plant seeds or seedlings of certain things, they just would not grow. So I try and replicate certain things, and I'm a bit of a plant collector, so I have lots of bits and pieces that I bring back. And I think, oh, well, I can't bring anything back, but I try and replicate the same look. Yeah, I reckon muley grass would be the thing that I just love
Hmm.
so much.
Yeah, I love my pink muley grass. This is just the time of year where it's getting really nice color, like really
Yeah,
opening up and looking good.
funny.
Not to rub it in,
Thanks,
but
Kathy. Thanks. You're making me feel so good.
on, on the opposite end of things, is there an Australian plant or plants, could be plural, that you think Americans are missing the boat on? Like we should be using it a lot more.
I think if people can get hold of, there's a whole species of plants that come from, there's so many different types of it, but it's a plant type called Eremophila. So I'll spell that Eremophila. So it's a whole species, a genus of plants that mostly come from the southwest of Western Australia, but they grow in cold climates and also, so they would be hardy in certain areas. But there's a beautiful one called Eremophila nivea, which has grey foliage and purple coloured flowers that almost looks like lavender
Wow.
without the
Hmm.
fragrance, but
Hmm.
it's a great pollinator plant. And all of the Eremophila species would be fabulous pollinator plants. Your hummingbirds would absolutely adore them. And there's so many different types. You can get ground covers, you can get ones that will grow taller to about 2 meters high, and all different colours. So some of them would have grey foliage and purple flowers. Some of them got green foliage or sort of grey-green foliage with orange and yellow flowers. So there's so many different types that could be incorporated into your landscapes where people have perhaps got drying climate because of climate change. They would adapt very, very well and look great in a container as either, depending on which type you select, either a spiller, a filler, or a thriller, because they do very well in containers.
Wow, those all sound fantastic. And
Yeah.
I'm Googling some pictures now and I'm like, okay, I need it all. I need it all. Hmm.
You need to come
So
down here for a visit, Kathy.
hopefully soon sometime, but I don't know that I'm sure the customs agents will be waiting for me now coming back through and to empty out those pockets.
That's the hard thing about traveling as a garden writer is that you are not allowed to bring things between countries. So no seeds, no plants. It's kind of the joy of traveling as well, but
Mhm.
it's also a bit frustrating sometimes. You think, oh, I'd love to be able to bring that back. But no, sadly, no. So,
Is there a big gardening culture in Australia similar to England, or is it just a side hobby?
no,
Hmm.
no, 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 no. There's a big gardening culture. People love their gardens, and it really started from I guess the first cultivated gardens happened with European settlement. So yeah, a lot of the English garden style was brought here with the English first settlers. And so that has very much influenced our garden style. But I would say now Australians have their own garden style where we incorporate a lot of native plants into, people have Japanese gardens, they have English style gardens, depending on where you live, or Australian native gardens, and everything in between. So, people will have a little bit of everything in their garden too. A bit like me, I have a little bit of everything because I'm a very greedy gardener. I have to have it all. So I try and I'm always learning and planting different things and think, oh, I'll give that a try and see how that goes. So I'd say probably traditionally would be an English style garden, and the lessons that were brought in from English gardeners, and historically that would be the case for sure.
And going along with the garden culture, are there a lot of garden club participations, garden shows, or flower shows?
There are. So, for instance, there's at the moment, because it's the beginning of our spring period, there seems to be a garden show on every weekend. So there's, small things like last weekend was the Orchid Society had their exhibition, and they had all sorts of talks about how to pot up your orchids and how to repot them and how to care for them. Next weekend is a rose show, so a lot of people's roses are starting to bloom now. The people that pruned in July will be getting their first flush of roses. So the Rose Society having their different things. So there are lots of little garden clubs. Unfortunately, some of them are aging out. So we're always, the garden clubs and society are always looking for new young members to bring in and teach their fantastic knowledge, share their fantastic knowledge with. We have two big garden festivals here in Perth. We've got the Perth Garden Festival, which is held in the middle of the city. We have the Kings Park Festival, and then there's also, which is all wildflowers and West Australian species and showcasing those. And then we have smaller ones like the Kalamunda Garden Festival, where I go and do talks most years, and that occurs all through the year. I think they have 6 times a year, the Kalamunda Garden Festival. Maybe it's 4 or 6. There's the Araluen Country Club, which is a beautiful botanical garden, and they're all open at the moment with their Tulip Festival. And then all through the country, we have open gardens through the countryside, 2 and 3 hours outside of Perth. We have open gardens where people can go and visit beautiful gardens in little country towns. So, yeah, there is a good gardening culture and an appreciation of how hard it is to garden here. And people like to have a look at that and just learn from others when they're setting up a new garden for sure.
Yeah, here, there's garden tours, there's the Garden Conservancy with some open garden days, but not as prevalent, I think, as in Australia or England, of course. But we'd love it if there were more and more gardens
but
to
you
see.
also have your master gardeners too, don't you?
Mhm.
And they play a big role in educating people about gardens and gardening.
Yeah, and I think they're a great support system, for beginning gardeners and also people who are, kind of hitting that wall and thinking, what's wrong with my plant? So
Yeah,
it's great
no,
to ask a master gardener for that. So are
I love that.
houseplants also big in Australia?
They are, and boy, during COVID, everyone went crazy for houseplants. So Monstera was the big one. Everybody wanted one
Mm-hmm.
of them, especially the variegated ones.
Oh, yeah.
People love growing the Phalaenopsis orchids inside. The Madonna lily, everybody loves that. Shephera, the umbrella tree. Do you grow them?
Mm-hmm. As
Yeah,
houseplants, yep.
as houseplants. Well, I'm looking at one in my backyard now that must have been planted, somebody's houseplant from the 1970s that's now probably must be at least 25 feet high. So don't put them in your garden, folks. It's sitting on the back of a sewer drain, I think, and it's doing very well, but it's huge. It's a great habitat for birds, so we leave it there. But yeah, people love their houseplants, especially younger people. Younger gardeners love houseplants, and I think that's awesome. I think we should all embrace that more. They kill more than they than live, but that's a good thing for the industry, for the horticulture
Mm-hmm.
industry. It keeps it going.
You can
So
always buy more. Yeah.
you can always buy more. Yeah.
So, are there any gardens in the U.S. that you haven't visited that you're looking forward to visiting?
Let's see. I always just go with the flow, Kathy. Like
Mm-hmm.
wherever anybody wants to take me, I say yes. I never say no. Oh, I don't think I'd like to go there. I just say yes to everything, and I'm always surprised about the beauty and the wonderful things that I see. So nothing really. No, no, no. I would like to go and see some of the Disney gardens. Funnily enough, I just think that would be
Mm-hmm.
quite interesting to see that the way that they're curated and find out the behind the scenes information with all of that. I would like to see that. Just from an education point of view, really, I'm not really into that style of garden because I think the movement towards having more pollinator plants and that sort of wildscaping is going to be, that is the future of our gardening, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more that I can learn about that, and that's why I loved Chicago so much, because they are really embracing that and having those pollinator gardens everywhere. The more that I can learn about that, the more I can add value to people wanting to do that here.
Mm. Yeah, and I can recommend. I've done the behind the scenes, some of the horticulture at Disney, and it's really interesting psychology. It's not so much about the plants; it's about
Exactly.
kind of
Yeah.
guiding the people through the parks with the plantings, and then
Yeah, I
of
think that's
course,
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, and of course, setting the mood because,
Yes, of course.
just like horticulture at a zoo or horticulture at any other theme garden, so you're trying to, either evoke a dinosaur setting or a specific story, which is obviously a very interesting type of horticulture.
Yeah. Very, very different. So, but I'm so lucky, Kathy. As I said earlier, I've seen, I look at lists of the best botanical gardens in the world, and I've seen so many of them because of my travels to the US. So, I've been very lucky, very lucky.
And we'd love to host you and have you here. And so, how can our listeners contact you to find out more?
So, I have a website which is andreawhiteley.com. I'm very active on social media. I have a really fun Instagram account, which is Andrea Whiteley Garden. So people can contact me there. I have Facebook, Andrea Whiteley Garden Consultant Facebook. I write a blog. I have courses available on my website that people can purchase. So one is about growing trees in Perth and Western Australia, and the other one is a seasonal calendar, a seasonal guide, planting season by season. So that's a helpful guide for people as well. I'm on the radio here in Perth, so I do commercial radio, which is radio station 6PR. So people can listen to the podcasts from that. They can also listen to the podcast from community radio, which I do, called Curtin FM, CURTIN FM, and that's 100.1. So people can listen to me on the radio as well. Both of those radio stations have got really good podcasts where you can listen to the gardening program only. So that works well too.
Mm-hmm. And we're so fortunate that most commercial radio stations do have a podcast component that you can listen to internationally. So anybody in the world can pick up radio stations that they were never able to in the past.
Isn't it wonderful? It's really made the world a smaller place, and you can find out things that are happening all over the world so easily now.
Mm-hmm. And so, in summing up, Andrea, what would you like Americans to know about Australian gardens?
Well, our gardens are very diverse depending on where you live in the country, much like the US in many ways. So, if you live on the East Coast, you can go anything from tropical Queensland, which is like Florida, down to the snow in Victoria and in Tasmania, over here in Western Australia where it's more arid. So we have huge diversity with our gardens, much like you guys do in the US. So in that way, I guess, where depending on where you live, you garden accordingly, really, don't you? So, or for those of us who are just lovers of all plants, you try and incorporate that into your garden. So I guess it's only really distance that separates us, Kathy.
Mm-hmm. And as I always say, all gardening is local.
That's exactly right. And we should be eating more locally and, reducing our food miles, and the same too with our gardens and gardening and incorporating the plants that are endemic to the place where we live, because they're the ones that are going to grow best.
So true. Thank you so much, Andrea.
You're welcome. Lovely talking to you, Kathy.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Jewels of Opar Plant Profile. Jewels of Opar, Tilinum paniculatum, is an annual flowering plant that is also known as fame flower. The foliage is light green and succulent-like. It is related to purslane, and the leaves are edible. The taste and texture is comparable to Malabar spinach. The flowers are light pink and bloom along long wands, similar to baby's breath. The flowers dry to beautiful jewel-like seed heads that look great in cut flower arrangements. The plant is native to parts of the South and the Caribbean. They are hardy to USDA zones 8 and higher. They grow to 2 to 3 feet tall. Jewels of Opar is a pollinator favorite. Available cultivars include Kingwood Gold, Limon, and Variegatum. Plant the seeds in late spring or early summer in a full sun spot with good drainage. They self-sow easily and may naturalize if you live in a tropical climate. Be sure to save some seeds from this year's flowers to plant next year. Jewels of Opar, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, my tall Tartarian asters are blooming, and over at the community garden plot, the radish seedlings have sprouted, though the lettuce seeds we planted a few weeks ago have never shown up, so I think I'm giving up on those and planting spinach in their place. In the garden tips that we shared on our social media this week, we talked all about cold frames, including the advice that you should not use old windows if they have any lead paint still on them, and that you can use incandescent old strings of holiday lights to line them to add a little bit extra warmth in the depths of wintertime to your cold frame. If you like this episode, please share it with one gardening friend. I think they'll enjoy it as well. In local community garden events, a few that are coming up that you might be interested in attending include the meeting of the Silver Spring Garden Club on Monday, October 21st at 7:30 p.m. at Brookside Gardens in Wheaton, Maryland. The subject of the talk is indoor food gardening, and that is free and open to all. You can find out more details about that at the Silver Spring Garden Club Facebook page or at silverspringgardenclub.com. I will be giving a talk for Brookside Gardens, and this will happen via Zoom or as a webinar, so You do not need to be present. It will be recorded. If you register in advance, you will be sent a recording of it. And that takes place on Thursday, October 24th at 7 p.m. The topic is dealing with deer and other garden mammal pests in your garden. And you can register for that through the Active Montgomery website or Brookside Gardens. And also coming up on Saturday, November 2nd, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. in person at Green Spring Gardens in Alexandria, Virginia, is the Eco Savvy Gardening Fair. I will be the keynote speaker speaking on urban and small space gardening. The day is hosted by the VCE Master Gardeners, and you can register for that for a fee of $35 at fairfaxcounty.gov Parks website. And finally, coming up on Saturday, October 26th, is the Persimmon Festival that takes place in Afton, Virginia at friend of the GardenDC podcast, Mike McConkey's Edible Landscaping Orchards. And you can find out more details about that at ediblelandscaping.com. The Persimmon Festival includes orchard tours, persimmon tastings, and more. Happy gardening!
This is Christy Page with Green Prints with the last word on a perfect fall day making memories in an apple orchard. Growing up, my great-aunt owned an apple orchard. To me, it was a place of magic and wonder. The gnarled apple trees stretching as far as the eye could see looked like a scene from The Wizard of Oz. But there were no wicked witches here, although there was a scarecrow or two. Every October, the entire family would take the 30-minute drive to Aunt Lorraine's house for an afternoon filled with picking apples, making cider, and family fun. I come from a large family, so this was no small feat. First thing in the morning, we would all meet up at my grandparents' house. This home has been the hub of our family for over 60 years. We would then get ready to carpool. This was well before the introduction of seatbelt laws. My grandparents' truck had a cap over the truck bed, and inside the bed were benches along each side and a table in the center. All of us grandkids who could sit up on our own would pile in the back. My grandmother would open the sliding window on the back of the cab, put a Roger Miller tape in the tape deck, and off we would go. 30 minutes pass in the blink of an eye now, but back then it seemed to take forever. We played games, sang about roller skating in a buffalo herd, and laughed so hard our sides ached. I'm sure there were squabbles and versions of "Are we there yet?" but those don't stand out in my memories. Finally, we would arrive, and with just a little bit of pushing and shoving, we would all hop out of the back of the truck and take off for our afternoon of wonder. Our parents, very thankful for the peaceful ride without us, would remind us of the orchard rules, hand bags to us older kids to put the apples in, and send us off to our adventure. To us, it was not just an apple orchard. To our very active imaginations, we had been dropped onto another planet and were searching for other life forms. Or we were explorers tracking through a new land. Or my favorite, we were on a special mission and needed to complete certain tasks before the day was done. Wherever our imaginations managed to take us, we were so happy to all be there together. I'm pretty sure we ate about as many apples as we placed in the bags. We stood in awe as we watched apple cider being made. We sat on the grass and enjoyed a picnic of sandwiches for lunch. We reveled in the warm sun and cool breeze of fall. After a nearly perfect day, we would all load back up into the truck and cars to head for home. The younger cousins often fell asleep on the benches in the back of the truck while the older kids played a few more games of Go Fish. We were all a little quieter after a long day in the sun. My grandmother would often look back and smile. We all grew up. My great-aunt sold the orchard, and those magical days came to an end. They live on, though, in my memories. Every October, I think fondly of those wonderful family days. I grab an apple, put Roger Miller on the radio, and smile. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at greenprints.com.
Thank you for listening to Garden DC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to the supporter link in our show notes or directly to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/. www.facebook.com/show/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on social media at WDC Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Please take a minute to share us on social media with #GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.